Magicka Templars didn't really get any changes to their class skills and passives in the Update 32 Deadlands DLC, but they did get a ton of buffs in the previous update, the Waking Flame DLC. I did a full build video covering Templars after those changes went through, which I'll have linked in the description, and most of that is still the same for this patch. So instead of doing a complete new build guide that would have 99% of the same info as the previous one, this will just be a short build update to mention the few tweaks and adjustments that will be made in Update 32 due to some of the other changes in the patch. So this will be more of an augment to the pre-existing video. DPS is up a bit over the last patch. Big thanks to Castagny for letting me share this combat metrics report where he got 116k DPS. He said he is still using the 20-second opening and 12-second static rotation I had in my last video, but with a little different gear setup and different traits on the dual wield front bar, which I will cover in just a bit. Hi, I'm Skinny Cheeks, and this is my Magicka Templar DPS build update for the Deadlands DLC. So what exactly will we be covering in this video? First, we'll go through the new crit damage cap and how that may affect your race choice and your champion point slottables. And then I'll cover some great gear options we have available, including some new weapon trait choices. So really anything not mentioned here in this update will be the same as in the previous build from the Waking Flame DLC. And if you are enjoying this content and you happen to not be subscribing to the channel, why not click the subscribe button? It is free, you can always change your mind later, and it really does help the channel out a ton. Alright, let's go ahead and get into it. Let's talk about the new 125% cap on crit damage. So everyone starts with the base of 50% additional damage when you critically strike, and then you can add up to 75% more on top of that to get to that 125% cap. This generally won't be an issue if you are solo or even in most 4-person dungeon groups, but for those groups that are a little more optimized, especially 12-person trial teams, you'll need to make sure that you are hitting the cap without wasting too much crit damage going over it. There are a ton of different ways to stack up crit damage to get to that cap, and it will be really up to you and your group to decide how you want to go about it. So let's go through some examples. The first two will be for setting up for the 21 million health trial dummy. This one here is for a non-Khajiit. So we'll start with our base 50% and then add on with minor force, major force, the backstabber node, our Templar passive piercing spear, one piece of medium armor here, and then our mythic kilt and minor brittle. So all of these add up to 127%, which is just over that cap. So if you are a Khajiit, you can pretty easily adjust here. You'll just drop backstabber and then slot thaumaturge instead. And then I added in one extra medium piece too to get us over that cap, but you could also just stick with one medium piece and be 1% under the cap. So unfortunately, with Khajiits needing to drop backstabber, the thaumaturge node, while not bad, is not nearly as stat efficient as the backstabber node. So looking at a comparison with the races, Khajiit has fallen a little behind high elves and dark elves for damage. They are still really close though, at under 2% difference. So I got these numbers by using UESP's build editor, and then instead of backstabber for Khajiits, I added in thaumaturge. So taking a standard Magplar parse on the dummy, I calculated what percentage of the damage was being boosted by each champion point node. So with Thaumaturge, we are still adding in somewhere around 3.4% of a damage boost that Khajiits get for slotting that. And of course, all of these percents will vary a little bit depending on how exactly you're set up. This was just with my specific build, but that 3.4% from Thaumaturge is what keeps Khajiits pretty close behind. It isn't quite enough to offset the 258 weapon and spell damage that high elves and dark elves get, especially with Khajiits being about 1,000 less magicka than those races too. But overall, I do think the balance is pretty fair there, as Khajiits also get a bonus to their health and all of their recoveries that high elves and dark elves don't get. So with how close they are in damage, I think overall it's probably in a pretty fair spot. And it is really close. Really, any of the race choices from top to bottom are good enough for all levels of content. So let's just take a look at a couple more examples before we move on. These would be if you have elemental catalysts going in your group. So non-Khajiits would probably swap to Thaumaturge in this scenario and drop backstabber. Or if you are a Khajiit, you could drop minor force, be that from barbed trap or maybe from a set like Medusa or Zogvin. And that's sometimes a pretty good way to go about it. If you want to drop minor force, you could slot something like Camo Hunter instead and still get your Fighters Guild passives, but also free up a global cooldown from not having to cast barbed trap. So definitely some options there, a little bit of wiggle room to make some adjustments. Again, these are just a couple of examples. There are a ton of different ways to adjust and meet the cap. And then back to the champion point nodes really quick. If you do happen to be set up in a way where you are dealing less than 28% of a certain category of damage, so maybe you have less dots in your setup or something, I do think about 28% or so is that break-even point where the Untamed Aggression passive might be worth slotting. This is just if you are needing to drop a crit damage passive and use something else instead, like in some of these examples, but this is probably a little more relevant on other classes since Templars have a bit less extreme of a split between the damage types, but still wanted to bring it up as it may be something you want to consider. Alright, now let's go over the gear. So all of the options from the last build video still work well. We just have some new options this patch that are really good too. So you'll see on this chart here, on top of what we had available last patch, I've also added in Cuirass, Deadly Strike, Zogvin, and AY or Berserking Warrior as possible front bar options. And I will have this chart down in the description to reference as well. So Cuirass Wrath, which comes from Black Drake Villa, I think will be the most popular choice to run as a front bar set paired with Beside this patch. Cuirass has really nice 2 to 4 piece bonuses and gives you major berserk on the 5 piece. Deadly Strike was also hybridized and boosts a ton of our damage as a Magplar, including all of our dots, plus our main spammable puncturing sweep and our execute radiant oppression. I think Cuirass does pull out just slightly ahead, but Deadly is definitely pretty close behind and a very strong option. But really there are a ton of options here, and even Reliquin can work pretty well, which I didn't list here, though it isn't my favorite to pair with Beside, but maybe if you have War Maiden or Sorrow on the body, it would be pretty nice to front bar, and you wouldn't have the overlapping 3-piece Minor Slayer bonuses. And you probably noticed the kilt was still in the setup. I do think it's still really strong when you can keep up all of those stacks, but monster sets are definitely a great option again this patch. I did a video covering those, so if you want a bit more in-depth rundown on them, make sure to check that out, but I'll do a summary here as well. All of these monster sets seem to do really well now that they can critically strike. Zon is one on the list here that cannot critically strike though, just something to keep in mind. Specifically for Magicka Templar, I do really like Narayaneth here since it should have really nice uptime with your jabs triggering it, and Veladreth seems pretty amazing for AoE stuff as well, especially short bursty stuff. And then finally for the traits on our weapons, if you are doing a staff, Precise does still seem to be the strongest option we have available, but for dual wield with the new cap on crit damage, Precise did take a little bit of a hit, which pushes that Nirnhoned trait as more of a clear-cut winner on your main hand. And then with the offhand, with the buff to the charge trait, it's also doing really well for single target DPS to add in all that extra status effect damage. But Precise on the offhand also still works really well too, especially if you're needing some extra cleave damage for the fight. And if you do still have the precise setup from last patch, it isn't bad or anything, it just seems like these new setups do just a tad bit more. Alright, that's gonna do it for this video. See, not really too much to change up, but just wanted to go over some of these tweaks so everybody's up to date. We'll still do our skills and our rotations pretty much the same way as before, we just have a few small changes to make and new gear sets to pick up for the Deadlands patch. If you do have any questions, I do try and get to most of my comments here on YouTube, or you're welcome to stop by one of my Twitch streams and ask in there as well. Always happy to discuss ESO stuff over there and try to answer all the questions that come through there too. Thank you so much for stopping by, and a big thank you to my current Patreon supporters. If you'd like to see how you can help support the channel through Patreon, I'll have a link in the description below. And a special thanks to Nicholas, Simon, Privy League Guild on PlayStation's EU server, Cougar is Bay in the Cougar City Guild, Stridig, the Order of War Guild, Iffy, Cantankerous Cat, Shady, and my wonderful wife. I will see you all in the next one. Bye.